Welcome to the instructional video on how to submit your own personal paranormal story to Creepskates. Let's get straight into it. So firstly, you want to get up an email and address it to creepskatesaustralia@gmail.com. For a title, what I want you to put is your name, followed by your state or city and country of residence. If you wish to remain anonymous, just type anon, but I'll ask that you at least put the country that you're from. So I'm going to be Mitch, Melbourne, Australia. So in the body of the email, first and foremost, I want your story. And please keep the writing in easily legible font and the color black. To be eligible for inclusion in this segment, your submission has to include a media accompaniment. Whether that is one picture or 40 videos, you just have to have something to go along with it that's media based. If you only have one photo, generally just keep the narrative to 1 or 2 sentences and just try to balance it so it can be engaging when all edited together. Now, I should say that the media that you submit doesn't have to be of paranormal origin, but it does have to have something to do with the story. To walk you through what I mean, I have an example of one of my own creepy stories from one of my least relaxing visits to an apparently haunted mental asylum near where I live. So, knowing the amount of media that I have at my disposal for this story, I've written a narrative into the email body, which is basically what will be read out to the audience over the top of the media. Now, interspersed throughout the narrative, I have these photo file names in brackets. These should correspond to photos relevant to the place in the story you're up to and where you think they'd most effectively go. This will give me an idea of editing and allow you to be in on the process of that as well. Doesn't matter what you call the files, just make sure that the file names in the brackets match the files that you attach to the email. Some of these photos here came from Google, and that's fine as long as you're cool to use them. These other photos I took from an old ghost story submission blog that I attempted, where I'd submit my own stories sometimes anonymously because no one would submit to it. So here's hoping that this one goes a little bit better. So the last part of the process would be to attach the files to your email. Again, make sure the names in the brackets correspond to the files that you're attaching and you should be alright. In the case of videos or a bunch of high quality pictures that exceed the limit you can attach to the email, upload them somewhere and attach a download link. File Dropper, Imager, Dropbox and things like that will do fine. As long as I don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops to download the files, I'll be happy. Just post the links to those in the email body a few spaces down from the actual narrative itself and send it in. So just post the links here. So with that, I'll show you how this particular submission would look in the finished segment on the channel. So this story comes from Mitch, who lives in Melbourne, Australia. I was investigating an apparently haunted place called Larundel Mental Asylum in Bundoora, Victoria, wearing a Johnny Cash shirt that makes his finger look like a penis. I came poorly prepared with just an iPhone to take photos and record EVPs on. This is how my phone was reacting with the dark. Everything was coming out sort of foggy. Throughout the night, we'd heard the voice of a little girl, and my friend had felt someone holding his hand. At this point, we were standing outside with no lights on, and I took this photo of the frames of one of the buildings, which didn't come out too well, featured here in the daytime. I aimed down, and in the next photo, I caught this. It looks to me like a little girl in a black dress with black shoes on, running away from me. I found out later that before it was an asylum, it was a home for girls. So as I've done with my own example, mostly what you write as the narrative will end up in the finished video. But I reserve the right to edit your narrative or the media involved. Say if you've made a mistake or there's not enough media to match the narrative, I'll cut it down, but still keeping the essence of what you've done. If there's absolutely no media for a certain part, don't worry too much about that because I can always cut to me in the studio explaining that part before cutting back to the rest of the footage or photos that you have. So this is another story from the same place, actually, on a different night. And this one involves a variety of different media to show you how to put a more complicated submission together. As you can see, I have a number of places with photos in this submission. Again, these are just pictures of the asylum and stuff. The real difference is that I have audio and video in this one as well. So here's what this one will look like in the segment. Here's another story about that haunted asylum from Mitch in Melbourne, Australia. The second time I went to Larundel Mental Asylum, we explored a building that was completely burnt out. While walking down the burnt hallway littered with glass and debris, I caught something on my voice recorder. What? That is also a sound that I can't physically make either. Anyway, like 2 whole years later, a local paranormal crew did a documentary on Larundel, and when I approached them and asked them if I could use their footage, they said no. So I'm going to link you to the video where they capture a very, very similar sound to what I did. Safe to say that watching their documentary at 1:30 a.m. by myself and not having heard of them or knowing of these people at all, it chilled me to the bone. So I guess when structuring your submission, you can refer back to what I've done in the email body here in terms of structuring the narrative with the files in brackets, and then look at the examples and how they translate into the edited finished copy that will make it onto the channel. So one more example, and I'm confident that you'll be able to submit anything you've got to this segment with minimal fuss. I just got all these old home movie tapes of me and my brothers growing up that my dad once edited into some sort of family home video montage. So I'm actually pretty lucky to be able to tell this story. This one's basically to show you how to submit if you have a long video or videos that you need to break up into different relevant clips for your submission. I would recommend cutting each relevant clip from the broader video up yourself and labeling them sort of with a different file name. But if you can't do that, this is how to submit one single video file that you want cut up into multiple reference points. So this is a story that I thought I had evidence for in the footage I'm about to show you, but my dad left out a few tapes, and it must be on one of those. Anyway, this will just be footage that speaks in a way to parts of the story without containing the elements that might be quote-unquote supernatural. Which, by the way, you're all fine to do as well. As long as there's some media to carry your story along, that's good. So this shows how I want it done. I've got my email here addressed to creepskatesaustralia@gmail.com. I've got my name and my country of residence. You'll notice that I've begun the first sentence with footage from a file called vid5, but I also have vid6 and vid7 and I think vid11 somewhere. There it is. Take vid5 for example. I've referenced it multiple times and I've given a timestamp for what part of the footage I want used in each individual instance. So this was actually a little bit hard, and I actually had to come back and edit this so it would fit properly. So please don't worry about being too specific about these time references. I'll use my powers of common sense to figure out what you're referring to if the times indicated don't entirely match up. So don't worry about being too specific about them. I'll just edit the narrative running underneath the images to be longer or shorter so that it fits. I don't need this to be perfect by any means. I want it to be relatively easy and intuitive for you to submit while still allowing you the freedom to basically structure and shape your own story. So here's what this last example would look like edited together. Since I was young, I've always been susceptible to seemingly psychic and paranormal experiences. My mother was before me and I seemed to inherit it. I grew up thinking it was normal that people would stand over my bed while I tried to sleep. I've had validated experiences of knowing specific details about people who died in random houses I've been in throughout my life. More generally, I've always seemed to know things that I shouldn't or couldn't have known.
Dad, I didn't even know, but I told Matthew that he will get the teensiest box of Lego in the world, and he did.
At the point of this particular story, I was in the early years of school, and I lived in a double-story house overlooking a bay and a foreshore forest that I used to play in. Before I became interested in surfing and the rest of it, and yes, that is me as a teenager, I used to go in that forest to find trees to build tree houses in. One day I was in the bush to the left of where I am in this particular piece of footage, in amongst those trees, and I saw a boy staring at me. A rare sight, as I don't think I've ever seen anyone else in there while I was playing. The boy introduced himself and asked me my name. Then he asked me to play a game with him and beckoned me to follow. I agreed timidly and followed him a distance into the bush before realizing I'd gone beyond the boundary set for me by my dad. I apologized awkwardly and turned back. And I looked back over my shoulder as I felt eyes on me, and I saw this boy pull a face at me that I've never been able to forget. It was this face, and it gives me the creeps just thinking about it. From that day, I started having a reoccurring dream. I dreamed that the kid from the bush was standing in the doorway to my bedroom beckoning me out. And I used to follow him out in this dream, and actually have woken up outside my house because of it. But I've fallen out of windows while sleepwalking, so I didn't think it was necessarily supernatural, but it was certainly creepy. The thing that I can't explain away as simply, and I thought I had footage of it, but apparently I don't, is that my brother Warwick would ask for bedtime stories about Big Mouth, a boy he'd seen around our house that would pull faces at him. So I don't have a maximum or a minimum time frame for how long these videos should go, but I'm imagining maybe there'll be 5 or 6 sort of videos that fit into one segment being released at a time, and I'll release that whenever I get the stories to make them up, whether it be once a month or once every couple of weeks or whatever, once a year, hell, whatever. So I don't mind if there are long ones. I'll do special episodes just for single stories if they're interesting enough. I don't mind. There's no prescribed way of doing this, so submit what you've got, but just be tactful about it. Don't write a 100-page novel when you have one photo to submit. So thanks for watching. If you have any questions, I'm hoping I've covered most things that you'll need, but if you do have any questions, please leave them in the comments section. And yeah, happy submitting. I'll see you soon.